You lied under oath, Officer Reynolds. But the truth doesn't need permission to walk through those courtroom doors. A black woman, accused of assaulting a white cop, stands silently as the courtroom watches, expecting defeat. But when she takes the stand, the tension shifts. No one, not the jury, not the judge, not even the officer who accused her, is ready for what she reveals next. 12 hours ago, she was just another defendant. In 30 minutes, she'll be the reason the entire system crumbles. Stick around. Because this isn't just a trial. It's a reckoning. Tap subscribe and turn on notifications. What you're about to witness will change the way you see justice. The morning sun filtered weakly through the heavy courtroom drapes, casting long streaks of amber light across the polished oak floor. Despite the grandeur of the chamber with its arched ceilings, brass fixtures, and gallery of wood-carved benches, it felt more like a cage than a place of justice. Every seat was filled. Curious locals leaned forward, journalists whispered and jotted notes, and a few stone-faced officers in uniform sat in the back, arms folded like statues. There was a quiet buzz in the air, not excitement, but tension. Something was off. Everyone could feel it. No one said it. At the center of this storm sat Camille Rivers. She didn't flinch, didn't look around, didn't blink more than necessary. Her posture was perfect, straight-backed, almost too perfect, as though her spine had never known the weight of doubt. Her skin, a rich deep brown, glowed faintly under the artificial lights overhead. Her dark hair was braided neatly, resting on her shoulders with military precision. The white blouse she wore was clean, crisp, without wrinkle. Black slacks, practical shoes. No jewelry, no distractions. It was an outfit that whispered discipline without needing to speak. But it was her eyes that held the room's attention, quiet, calculating, sharp. To the casual observer, she looked like any defendant. But to those who had spent enough time reading people, there was something different about her. Something that said, "I'm not what you think I am." The courtroom doors opened, and all conversation stopped as the bailiff called, "All rise." In walked Judge Walter Harmon, an older white man whose thinning silver hair and deeply lined face spoke of decades spent in rooms like this. He moved slowly, his black robe flowing like a cloak of authority. There were bags under his eyes and a heaviness in his steps, but his gaze still carried steel. This case, it seemed, had caught his attention. Maybe it was the press. Maybe it was the unusual confidence of the accused. Or maybe it was Officer Garrett Reynolds seated at the plaintiff's table in full uniform, looking like a man about to win a war without lifting a finger. Officer Reynolds leaned back in his chair, a smug expression creeping across his face. His uniform was pristine, his short blonde hair meticulously combed. His blue eyes scanned the room like he owned it. His story had already been aired on local news stations. Officer assaulted during disturbance call. The public was primed to believe him. The bailiff cleared his throat. Case number 1124, the state of Georgia versus Camille Rivers. Camille stood slowly, every motion deliberate, like a woman who didn't believe in wasted energy. The courtroom murmured as she turned to face the bench. She didn't acknowledge Reynolds. Didn't blink at the crowd. She simply stood, calm and unbothered. Her attorney, Marcus Bell, stood beside her. Young, black, sharply dressed, but visibly tense. He shuffled his notes nervously, glancing sideways at Camille as if seeking reassurance. She gave him none. Her eyes were focused on the judge. Her face, unreadable. "Your Honor," Marcus said, voice just above a whisper, "the defense is ready." Judge Harmon nodded slowly. "Officer Reynolds, you may take the stand." The courtroom shifted again as Reynolds rose. He walked to the stand like he was entering a parade. His every movement was slow, exaggerated, rehearsed. He paused just before reaching the seat, casting a quick glance at Camille. He smirked, small, but unmistakable. Camille stared back. No expression. No movement. Just observation. After taking the oath, Reynolds settled into the witness chair and adjusted his belt with performative discomfort. He glanced at the jury. They watched him closely. He wanted them to see him as the victim, the hero, the authority. On the evening of April 12th, he began, voice steady and loud. "I responded to a 9/11 call near Douglas Avenue, in the east side of Brookhaven. A disturbance outside a closed storefront." He paused for effect. "I arrived at the scene to find Ms. Camille Rivers loitering by the building entrance. When I asked what she was doing, she immediately became aggressive." There were soft murmurs. Loitering was a word that carried weight, especially when describing a black person in a white neighborhood. "She refused to identify herself," Reynolds continued. "She raised her voice. When I attempted to calm her down, she physically assaulted me, struck me in the chest, and then reached for my sidearm." Gasps filled the courtroom. Camille didn't move. Not a twitch. I had no choice, Reynolds added, adopting a pained tone. I had to subdue her. From the back row, a woman's voice could be heard muttering, "That sounds like a damn lie." Heads turned. The judge banged his gavel once. "Order," Judge Harmon said, eyes narrowing. "Thank you, Officer Reynolds," he added flatly. "You may step down." As Reynolds returned to his seat grinning slightly, Marcus Bell rose. "Your Honor," Marcus began, "before we proceed." "Save it for your cross-examination, Mr. Bell," Judge Harmon interrupted. "Let's keep this moving." Marcus swallowed hard and nodded. Camille leaned slightly toward him and whispered something that only he could hear. "Stay calm. Stick to the facts." Her voice was low, steady, like a drumbeat that wouldn't break. He nodded, trying to absorb her certainty like a sponge. As the prosecution rested its opening argument, the atmosphere in the courtroom tightened. You could hear the air conditioning hum, could hear the scratch of pens, could see Reynolds lean back in his chair and shoot a glance toward his fellow officers seated along the back wall. He winked. Camille saw it, noted it, filed it away like everything else. "Ms. Rivers," Judge Harmon said at last, "you may take the stand." Camille rose. She didn't just walk. She moved with precision like a person used to being watched, judged, and expected to fail. The room went quiet. She adjusted the microphone carefully, sat down slowly, straightened her spine. The prosecutor, a middle-aged white man named Kent Aldridge with a sharp suit and sharper eyes, approached the bench. "Ms. Rivers," he began, smiling like a man who thought he had already won. "Can you walk us through your actions on the night of April 12th? Camille didn't rush. She leaned forward slightly, her voice calm and clear. "I can," she said. "But first, I need to clarify one thing. The officer's account of that night is not just inaccurate. It is intentionally misleading." The entire courtroom inhaled at once. Aldridge blinked. "A bold accusation," he said, still smiling. "Do you have any proof?" Camille looked directly at him. "I believe," she said evenly, "that the truth has a way of showing itself." There was no smirk, no sarcasm, just calm certainty. Judge Harmon cleared his throat. "Proceed." Camille's eyes shifted to the jury. "I was returning home from visiting a friend," she said. "Stopped near Douglas and Fifth to check directions on my phone. I wasn't trespassing. I wasn't causing a disturbance." She paused, letting it settle. "That's when Officer Reynolds approached me. Flashlight in my face. Aggressive tone. He asked what I was doing. I told him I was checking directions." "And what happened next?" Aldridge asked. "He asked for my ID. I asked if I had done anything wrong." "So you questioned his authority?" "I questioned his motive." Camille's words were like a scalpel, precise, controlled. "I wasn't on private property. I wasn't blocking traffic. I wasn't breaking any law. I simply wanted to know why he was demanding my ID." The murmurs began again. The judge knocked his gavel, but people were no longer whispering out of curiosity. Now it was disbelief. And something else. Rage. "When I asked for clarification," Camille continued, "he accused me of being uncooperative. Before I could say another word, he grabbed my arm. Silence. I told him to let go. He didn't. He tightened his grip. He said, and I quote, 'Women like you need to learn how to listen.'" The courtroom exploded. This time, Judge Harmon slammed his gavel multiple times. "Order. I will clear this room." But the room wouldn't forget those words. Camille sat still, her hands folded, her voice unshaken. Marcus Bell looked over at her. And for the first time, he didn't feel nervous. He felt ready. The courtroom had quieted, but the tension was now electric. Camille Rivers sat in the witness stand, the weight of hundreds of eyes bearing down on her, and yet, she looked utterly unmoved. The murmurs from her last statement, "Women like you need to learn how to listen," still echoed in the air like gunfire that hadn't finished ringing. Prosecutor Kent Aldridge took a cautious step forward. Gone was the smug confidence he had just minutes before. Now, there was a measured hesitance in his voice. "Ms. Rivers, that is a serious allegation," he said slowly. "You're claiming Officer Reynolds made that statement to you during the arrest?" "Yes," Camille replied without blinking. "You have no audio recordings, no witnesses to corroborate this, correct?" "There were no witnesses close enough to hear," she said evenly. "And Officer Reynolds's body cam, as you know, was mysteriously non-functional during the incident." Kent hesitated, his lips tightening. Camille leaned forward slightly, her voice cool but unwavering. "It's quite the coincidence, isn't it? A police officer's body camera just so happens to malfunction during an alleged assault by a civilian." The judge raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Kent tried to redirect. Let's focus on the events as they unfolded. You say Officer Reynolds grabbed your arm first. I didn't say that. I testified it as fact. Another ripple through the crowd. Camille adjusted the mic. When he grabbed me, she continued, I told him I did not consent to being touched. He responded by twisting my wrist and slamming me against the patrol car. And at no point did you strike him? Kent asked, still clinging to his original narrative. No, I did not raise my hands. I did not make any aggressive moves. What I did do was ask him to stop. Kent was quiet, searching for a new angle. And yet, he said slowly, Officer Reynolds claims you reached for his weapon. Are you denying that? I am. Completely. Kent crossed his arms. Then what would be his motive for lying? Camille didn't hesitate. To justify his use of force. To frame me as the aggressor. To protect himself. The crowd stirred again. Objection. Kent snapped, turning toward the bench. Speculative. Overruled. Judge Harmon said flatly, never taking his eyes off Camille. She's the defendant. Let her speak. Camille turned toward the jury now, her voice steady but rising just slightly in strength. When I asked him to stop hurting me, she said, he told me again, quoting, you people always make things harder than they need to be. Then he shoved me harder against the vehicle and placed me under arrest. There was a sharp inhale from the back of the room. A woman stood up. That's enough, he needs to answer for this. The judge slammed his gavel. Bailiff, remove her if necessary. The woman sat, muttering, but the damage had been done. The calm surface of the courtroom had cracked and water was starting to flood in. Kent approached the stand again, his voice losing some of its sharpness. You claim he said those things. You claim he used excessive force. But again, no direct video evidence, no recording. There is video, Camille cut in. Kent blinked. Excuse me. There is video. Not from the officer's body cam, but from a bystander. Kent turned toward Marcus Bell, who was already rising from the defense table with a flash drive in hand. Your Honor, Marcus said, the defense moves to submit new video evidence. Captured by a civilian standing across the street. Kent nearly shouted. This was not disclosed. Sit down, Judge Harmon said coldly. Let's see it. The bailiff retrieved the flash drive and slid it into the courtroom's monitor system. The screen on the far wall lit up. The footage was grainy, taken from a smartphone. But it was clear enough. Camille could be seen standing on the sidewalk. Officer Reynolds approached, flashlight raised. The audio crackled, but it was audible. Reynolds's voice. I'm asking you what you're doing here, ma'am. Camille's voice. I'm checking directions. I'm not breaking any laws. Reynolds, you're getting hostile. Camille, no, I'm asking a question. And then it happened. Reynolds grabbed her arm. Camille pulled back. Camille, let go of me. I haven't done anything wrong. Reynolds, women like you don't get to question me. The courtroom froze. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to flicker in shock. On screen, Reynolds shoved her into the patrol car. Hard. Her cry of pain was audible. He yanked her arms behind her, handcuffing her. There was no struggle, no raised voice, no reaching for his weapon, just force and dominance. The video ended. You could have heard a pin drop. The judge's face had gone stone cold. Kent Aldridge looked like someone had yanked the floor out from under him. Reynolds, sitting in his chair, suddenly looked very small. Judge Harmon cleared his throat. Well then, Marcus Bell rose slowly. Your Honor, I believe this video directly contradicts the plaintiff's testimony and raises serious doubts about the integrity of his entire account. Kent stammered. That video doesn't show the whole interaction. But it shows enough, Marcus said, his voice louder now. Enough to reveal a lie. Officer Reynolds testified that Ms. Rivers became violent, that she reached for his weapon. There is no such behavior in that video. The judge held up a hand. Mr. Bell, we'll come back to that. Ms. Rivers, you may step down for now. Camille nodded and stood. She didn't look at Reynolds. She didn't need to. As she returned to the defense table, Reynolds leaned forward and whispered something to his attorney. His shoulders were tense. Sweat had formed above his collar. For the first time since the trial began, Garrett Reynolds didn't look like a man in control. He looked like a man who knew the walls were closing in. The courtroom had barely settled from the impact of the video evidence when Judge Walter Harmon called for a 15-minute recess. But no one was leaving their seat. People whispered, eyes darting between Camille Rivers and Officer Garrett Reynolds. Even the ceiling fans above seemed to hum with tension. Marcus Bell leaned over to Camille at the defense table, speaking just above a whisper. That video, it's a crack in the wall. Camille, hands folded neatly, replied without turning her head. Cracks don't bring down the house, Marcus. We need a hammer. At the plaintiff's table, Officer Reynolds looked like a statue trying not to sweat. His smug expression was gone. He had loosened his tie, and his lawyer, Richard Avery, whispered urgently into his ear. Reynolds nodded stiffly, but his eyes remained fixed on Camille only now. They didn't carry confidence. They carried calculation. Fear. 15 minutes later, the bailiff called the court back into session. The chatter evaporated instantly as Judge Harmon re-entered, face tight, gavel in hand. Court is now back in session, he announced. Mr. Bell, do you wish to proceed with further evidence or witness testimony? Marcus stood, calm and composed. Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Camille Rivers back to the stand. Gasps echoed around the room. Camille rose and walked with military precision to the stand once again. As she adjusted the microphone, her eyes didn't wander. She was composed still, centered. Marcus approached with deliberate steps. Ms. Rivers, he began. You've already testified that Officer Reynolds physically restrained you without cause and used language that indicated racial and gender bias. We've seen video evidence supporting a portion of that testimony. Camille nodded. Yes. Let's go deeper, Marcus said. Let's talk about what happened once you were handcuffed. Camille's jaw flexed slightly. He shoved me into the back seat of the cruiser. Told me I should have known better. Then he drove me to the precinct. No reading of my rights. No explanation. No Miranda warning? Marcus asked, eyebrows raised. None. The jury shifted in their seats. Even the judge's pen froze mid-note. Did he say anything else? Marcus asked. Camille inhaled deeply. He said, women like you don't scare me. You'll be crying for a deal by tomorrow. Kent Aldridge, the prosecutor, stood up. Objection. Unverified statements. Overruled. Judge Harmon said, his voice flat but firm. Marcus paused, then continued. And how did you respond? I said nothing, Camille replied. I'd already figured out what kind of game he was playing. Marcus took a step back, giving the jury a full view of Camille. Let me ask plainly. Did you, at any point during the arrest, attempt to strike or disarm Officer Reynolds? No, she said, her voice low but fierce. That accusation was fiction from start to finish. There was a heavy silence. And then Marcus took a breath. Ms. Rivers, he said, are you trained in combat tactics? Yes. Have you ever used lethal force? Yes. Marcus turned to the jury. Would you please explain to the court briefly how you were qualified to make those statements? Camille looked at Judge Harmon for a brief moment, then turned to the jury. My name is Lieutenant Commander Camille Rivers, United States Navy retired, she said. For 2 decades, I served as a Navy SEAL. The courtroom exploded. Several jurors gasped. A woman in the gallery covered her mouth. Someone dropped a pin. Reynolds visibly jolted in his seat, his hands suddenly clenching the armrest like a man trying to keep himself from sliding off a cliff. Judge Harmon's gavel slammed against the bench. Order. Order in this courtroom. It took nearly a minute to restore silence. When it did, Camille leaned into the microphone. I've led reconnaissance teams in Afghanistan, conducted rescue missions in Syria, and trained in over a dozen classified programs. I have 8 commendations for overseas tours and an honorable discharge. Every word was like a blow to the narrative Reynolds had built. The courtroom sat frozen. Marcus returned to the center of the room. As a SEAL, you're trained to handle high-stress encounters. Did you utilize that training during your arrest? I used it to stay calm, to avoid escalation, to protect myself without using force. And at no point did you retaliate? No, Camille said. My training taught me that real strength means knowing when not to strike. Marcus's voice grew louder. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I ask you, who do you believe was the threat that night? The silence was deafening. Reynolds's lawyer, Richard Avery, stood now, tension bleeding from every pore. Your Honor, he said, this is a dramatic turn, but it doesn't erase the fact that my client followed department protocol. Judge Harmon raised a single finger. Save it for your redirect, Mr. Avery. He turned to Camille. You may step down. She rose and walked back to the defense table. Her presence alone felt larger now, like a weight pressing against the walls of the courtroom. As she sat, Marcus whispered, they'll never look at you the same again. Camille replied quietly, They never really saw me to begin with. At the plaintiff's table, Reynolds looked like a man drowning. His supporters in the back row, fellow officers who had filled the courtroom at the beginning, were shifting uneasily in their seats. Then Judge Harmon turned to Avery. Would the prosecution like to redirect? Avery nodded and stood slowly. Yes, Your Honor. The prosecution would like to call Officer Garrett Reynolds back to the stand. The entire courtroom inhaled again. Reynolds rose slowly, adjusting his tie like it had grown tighter. He walked with less confidence this time, his shoulders not as squared, his footsteps heavier. When he took the stand, Avery approached. Officer Reynolds, he began, you've heard the defendant's claims. Do you wish to respond? Reynolds' jaw moved before words came. She's exaggerating. I didn't say half of what she claimed. And the video? Reynolds exhaled sharply. It doesn't show everything. It misses context. Context like what? She was defiant, Reynolds said, louder now. She challenged my authority. I felt threatened. Threatened? Avery repeated, nodding. And the moment where she supposedly reached for your weapon? She moved toward me. Fast. It looked like she was reaching for something. But you never felt contact? No, Reynolds admitted, but she could have. Avery nodded again, like a teacher with a student about to fail a test. Thank you, Officer Reynolds. No further questions. As Reynolds prepared to leave the stand, Marcus stood. Your Honor, may I? Judge Harmon gestured. Proceed. Marcus stepped toward Reynolds, hands behind his back. Officer Reynolds, let's clarify. You've testified multiple times that my client attempted to grab your weapon. Yes. And yet you just admitted she never made contact. She moved like she might. But she didn't. Reynolds said nothing. Your body cam failed, conveniently. The civilian video shows no aggressive action on her part. And now your only defense is that she might have. Reynolds clenched his jaw. I made a judgment call. A judgment that could have ruined someone's life, Marcus said coldly. And let's be honest, it almost did. Reynolds opened his mouth, but no sound came. Marcus turned to the judge. No further questions. The courtroom remained deadly silent as Reynolds stepped down and returned to his seat. The man who once commanded the room with arrogance now looked like a hollow figure, smaller than his badge and weaker than his lies. Marcus sat beside Camille and whispered, the courtroom shaking. Camille, eyes on the jury, replied, then let's make it collapse. The courtroom emptied slowly for the afternoon recess. But no one spoke. The tension from Officer Garrett Reynolds' shaky testimony still clung to the air like moisture before a storm. Outside, reporters gathered by the courthouse steps, phones buzzing with push notifications that whispered the same sentence across every screen. Defendant Camille Rivers revealed as retired Navy SEAL. Inside the defense conference room, Marcus Bell sat on the edge of a folding chair, still gripping his legal pad like it was a shield. Camille stood by the window, arms crossed, watching people scatter across the courthouse square. Marcus finally spoke. That was a tactical nuke. You just blew their story out of the water. Camille didn't turn around. Not enough. He blinked. What? That wasn't the kill shot, she said flatly. It rattled them. It weakened the frame. But it's not enough to bring down the whole building. Marcus stood, exasperated. Camille, you just told a jury that you're a combat-decorated Navy SEAL. That's not a footnote. It's a revelation. That alone should. She turned, her eyes sharp. This isn't just about winning the jury. This is about exposing the system that let Reynolds walk into that courtroom with a lie and think he'd get away with it. Marcus stared at her, then slowly nodded. Then tell me what you're not saying. You've been holding something back. A long silence filled the room. Finally, Camille exhaled. Meet me tonight. My place. After court. Marcus narrowed his eyes. You'll tell me everything? She nodded. Every page. Camille's modest house sat at the edge of Brookhaven, tucked behind a row of old maple trees that lined a quiet gravel road. It was the kind of place that whispered solitude rather than shouted wealth. Clean siding. An American flag in the window. A porch swing that hadn't moved in years. Marcus pulled up in his compact sedan, his headlights cutting through the early dusk. He killed the engine, stepped out, and was immediately greeted by the cold bite of night air and the rhythmic sound of crickets chirping somewhere in the distance. The porch light flicked on. Camille opened the door. Gone was the courtroom armor. She wore a navy hoodie and black joggers. Her hair was tied back. There was something deeply human about her now, no less composed, but stripped of presentation. She gestured for him to come inside. The interior was neat. Not sterile, not cold, but organized with the kind of discipline that came from years of routine. On one wall hung a framed photograph of Camille in uniform, arm around a gray-haired black man also dressed in navy blues. Below it, resting on a small wooden shelf, was a glass case holding a folded American flag. "Your father?" Marcus asked. Camille nodded. "He served too. Taught me how to shoot, how to hold a compass, and how to read people. I lost him in 2012. Cancer." "I'm sorry," Marcus said quietly. Camille said nothing, but moved toward the bookshelf. She pulled a weathered leather binder from between two thick volumes titled Combat Psychology and Leadership Under Fire. She laid it on the coffee table. Marcus sat down, his palms sweating slightly as he opened it. Inside, meticulously arranged documents. Service records, deployment orders, commendations, letters of recognition. And then, his eyes froze on one photo. A younger Camille Rivers, dressed in desert camo, crouched beside a crashed helicopter. Behind her, a soldier was being carried on a stretcher. Her arm extended, her face unreadable but commanding. "You pulled him out?" Marcus asked. "Under sniper fire," she replied. 27 minutes without air support. He flipped through more. A Bronze Star citation, a list of combat tours, a letter signed by a former Secretary of Defense. "You're more than just a SEAL," Marcus whispered. "You're a legend." Camille sat across from him, her hands folded. "But to Officer Reynolds," she said, "I was just another black woman standing where he didn't want me." Marcus shut the binder gently. "You could have told me all this on day one." "And what would you have done with it?" she asked, not unkindly. "Used it as a badge? Waved it around like proof I was one of the good ones." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. "I didn't want this case to be about medals," Camille continued. "I wanted it to be about truth. About what happens when people like Reynolds assume that authority equals righteousness." Marcus nodded, slower this time. "And now, she said, rising, "we use both." The next morning, the courthouse buzzed with energy. News vans had lined the street before sunrise. Protesters had begun to gather with signs. "Justice for Camille, unmask corruption, we stand with truth." The mood wasn't angry, it was expectant. Inside, the courtroom filled quickly. The jury entered silently. The gallery had expanded. Students, veterans, reporters, even a few retired officers from neighboring counties. Camille entered wearing a navy blue blazer and a white-collared shirt. She carried herself with precision, but no pomp. As she took her seat at the defense table, you could feel the air shift. She wasn't just a defendant anymore. She was a symbol. Marcus leaned toward her. "Ready?" Camille didn't look at him. "I've been ready." Judge Harmon entered, expression tight, gavel in hand. "We will continue the proceedings," he said. "Defense, you may present your next witness." Marcus stood. "Your Honor, we'd like to recall Camille Rivers to the stand." Camille rose and walked up again. As she passed Officer Reynolds, his eyes flicked toward her, but he couldn't hold her gaze. Marcus approached, his voice steady. "Lieutenant Commander Rivers," he began, "for the record, can you confirm your service background?" "Yes. I enlisted in the U.S. Navy at 19. Selected for BUD/S at 24. Deployed to Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, and Syria over a 20-year career. Retired with full honors." "And were you ever disciplined during your time in service?" "No, not once." "Would you describe yourself as someone who loses control in high-pressure situations?" "No. If anything, I'm trained to thrive in them." Marcus turned to the jury. "Then let's revisit the night in question. You've stated that Officer Reynolds escalated the situation, that he used excessive force, that he fabricated the claim you reached for his weapon. In your professional opinion, why?" Camille took a breath. "Because he saw a challenge to his authority. He didn't see me as a citizen. He saw me as a problem. And if you hadn't been a SEAL, if you hadn't had the presence of mind to stay calm and compliant, what would have happened? I'd be in prison. Or worse." Silence. Marcus let the moment hang, then turned back. No further questions. Camille stepped down, her walk slow but grounded. As she passed Reynolds, he shifted in his chair and adjusted his collar. He was sweating. The courtroom buzzed again, and Judge Harmon had to bang his gavel once more. Order returned, but the shift was irreversible. Camille Rivers had just declared herself, not just innocent, but invincible. The courtroom settled into a tense, loaded silence as Camille Rivers returned to her seat. Her calm presence filled the room like a current, silent but impossible to ignore. The jury watched her with new eyes, now no longer merely evaluating a defendant, but witnessing a soldier who had once defended the country, now defending herself from the very system she had served. At the prosecution's table, Officer Garrett Reynolds sat stiffly, his once commanding posture replaced by a closed, defensive shell. His lawyer, Richard Avery, leaned in and whispered something, but Reynolds gave only a short nod, his gaze fixed on the floor. Judge Walter Harmon looked down from the bench, fingers tapping against the edge of his gavel. "Mr. Bell," he said with a cautious tone, "do you have additional evidence to present?" Marcus Bell stood slowly, adjusting his tie with deliberate precision. "Yes, Your Honor. The defense would like to introduce evidence pertaining to Officer Reynolds's professional record." Avery was on his feet instantly. "Objection. Irrelevant to the case. Overruled." Judge Harmon cut in. "Proceed, Mr. Bell." From his briefcase, Marcus pulled a slim folder and walked toward the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you've heard today is already disturbing. But this isn't the first time Officer Reynolds's conduct has raised concerns. This," he said, holding up a stapled report, "is a summary of internal complaints filed against him over the past 6 years. Excessive force, racial profiling, verbal abuse. 14 in total. All filed, all quietly buried." The jury stirred. The gallery, which had remained mostly still since Camille's last testimony, now buzzed with renewed disbelief. Marcus handed copies of the summary to the clerk, who distributed them among the jurors. "All dismissed or unresolved," Marcus added. "All of them filed by people who, just like Ms. Rivers, found themselves at the receiving end of his unchecked authority." Avery stood again. "These are allegations, not convictions. Circumstantial and proven, and yet consistent," Marcus said sharply. "Consistent enough to show a pattern." Judge Harmon looked at the documents in front of him, his face unreadable. "The jury may consider the personnel file as part of the defense's argument." "Continue, Mr. Bell." Marcus walked back toward Camille and spoke without looking at her. "Ms. Rivers stood alone when this began. But she doesn't stand alone now, because the truth has a habit of inviting company." He turned back to the jury. What Officer Reynolds saw on that sidewalk wasn't a threat. It was a mirror, and it reflected back his fear of being questioned, his discomfort with being challenged, and his willingness to lie to protect himself when that fear boiled over. Across the aisle, Reynolds shifted in his seat, jaw clenched, fingers tapping an anxious rhythm against his thigh. "Let's strip away the uniforms and the titles," Marcus continued. "Forget Navy SEAL. Forget police officer. This comes down to one thing: credibility. You've heard the same story from 2 people. One backed by body language, restraint, calm logic, and now, evidence. The other backed by a malfunctioning camera and a story that's cracked under its own weight." A ripple of murmurs ran through the gallery. Judge Harmon didn't silence them this time. Reynolds's face was turning red now. He whispered something to Avery again, louder this time. Avery shook his head slowly, trying to maintain composure. Marcus turned toward the bench. "Your Honor, the defense rests for today." Judge Harmon nodded. "Very well. We'll recess until tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. The gavel fell, but no one moved. Camille stood and exited the courtroom with Marcus beside her, but her presence remained behind like smoke in the walls. Reynolds didn't move for nearly a minute after the adjournment, his eyes hollow, his breathing shallow. The gallery buzzed like a shaken hive. Outside, the crowd had grown. A larger media presence, activists holding signs, a woman holding a photograph of her teenage son with the words, "He lied then too." Back inside, Camille and Marcus entered the quiet of a small consultation room down the hallway. The door clicked shut. "That was everything we have," Marcus said. "Now it's on them." Camille looked out the window at the crowd. "They're not just watching this case, Marcus. They're watching to see if truth is enough, if silence can be broken, if power can be confronted without apology." He nodded, slowly. "So what happens if they don't listen?" Camille turned from the window. "Then we make sure they can't forget." That night, as news stations across the country replayed the video footage, broadcast her Navy record, and showed clips of Reynolds squirming on the stand, Camille sat quietly at home. The binder was back in its place on the shelf. The photograph of her and her father rested above the folded flag. She didn't need the noise. She knew the real battle was tomorrow, not for guilt or innocence, but for belief, for justice that didn't just show up in uniforms or titles, but in truth, finally being louder than lies. The next morning, the sun barely crested the horizon when crowds began gathering outside the Brookhaven County Courthouse. What had started as a local case was now a national storm. Cable networks set up tripods. TikTok live streamers panned their phones across posters reading "Camille spoke, now listen," and "This courtroom isn't big enough for the truth and a lie." Inside, the courtroom buzzed with a low hum of tension. Even the court clerk seemed more alert, tapping keys with careful precision. Jurors filed in with rigid shoulders and uneasy glances. They weren't just arbiters of justice, now they were witnesses to a system being peeled open from within. Camille Rivers entered through the side door with Marcus Bell beside her, both dressed sharply, quietly. She wore a black blazer with a muted navy pin, her hair pulled back into a tight knot. She didn't glance at the gallery, didn't blink toward Officer Reynolds. She walked like a woman who knew exactly how much space she took up and dared anyone to ask her to shrink. Judge Harmon entered a few moments later. He took longer than usual to sit, scanning the room with tired, narrowed eyes. Court is now in session. The matter of the state of Georgia versus Camille Rivers will resume. Mr. Avery, do you wish to redirect? Richard Avery stood, already sweating beneath his collar. He gave Reynolds a fleeting glance, one that said, "Brace yourself," before walking toward the witness stand. "Your Honor, the prosecution would like to recall Officer Reynolds for clarification of testimony." Reynolds rose, walking to the stand with the stiffness of a man trying to delay gravity. He adjusted the mic but didn't speak. Avery cleared his throat. "Officer Reynolds, you've heard the defendant's testimony. Her military background, the video evidence, the personnel file. Do you still stand by your original account of the events on April 12th? Reynolds hesitated. His voice, when it came, was brittle. "Yes. Mostly." "Mostly?" Avery asked, tightening. She wasn't completely compliant. She was questioning my authority." He glanced at the jury, then at Judge Harmon. "I had to act, to stay in control." Avery pressed on. "The video, though, it shows no physical aggression from Ms. Rivers. No attempt to reach for your weapon. How do you explain that?" Reynolds shifted in his seat. "The angle doesn't show everything. She moved fast. I thought she was reaching." "So you made a judgment call?" Avery offered, trying to soften the blow. "Yes," Reynolds answered. "It was chaotic." From the defense table, Marcus Bell stood. "Permission to cross-examine, Your Honor." "Granted," Judge Harmon replied. Marcus walked toward the stand slowly. "No rush. No heat. Just gravity." "Officer Reynolds, earlier in this trial you gave sworn testimony that Ms. Rivers physically assaulted you and attempted to reach for your service weapon." "I did," Reynolds replied, his voice cracking. "And now you say you thought she might have." Yes. She moved fast. But she never touched you. Never reached for your holster. Never shouted. Never raised a fist." "No," Reynolds admitted, eyes dropping. Marcus stepped closer. "Officer Reynolds, your body cam was malfunctioning that night, wasn't it?" "Yes. You've been with the department 10 years. How often has your body cam failed during an arrest?" Reynolds swallowed hard. "Once. This time." "Yes. And on this one occasion, your one equipment failure, we just happened to see a woman you're detaining stay calm, speak clearly, and never make a threatening move. Yet your report claims the opposite." Reynolds clenched his jaw. "That was my perception." "Your perception?" Marcus asked, voice sharp. "Or your defense?" Reynolds didn't respond. Marcus took a beat, then turned to the jury. "Let's talk about context. Officer Reynolds says he was threatened, that he feared for his safety. And yet, on camera, we see no aggression. We see restraint from Camille Rivers. We see force from Officer Reynolds. We see a false narrative unraveling in real time." He turned back. "Tell me, officer, did you know she was a Navy SEAL?" Reynolds hesitated, then muttered, "No." "But she didn't resist, didn't lash out, didn't even raise her voice. That's discipline. That's training. And yet, you still tried to label her as violent." "I followed protocol," Reynolds said, but the words lacked conviction. Is protocol lying under oath? Is protocol suppressing a complaint history? Is protocol abusing someone who asked a question you didn't like? Avery stood. "Objection argumentative." "Sustained," Judge Harmon snapped. "Mr. Bell, stay on point." Marcus stepped back, hands folded. "No further questions." Reynolds stepped down, his body sagging as he returned to the plaintiff's table. He didn't look at anyone, not even his lawyer. Behind him, the row of uniformed officers who had shown up for moral support now sat silently, their eyes heavy with doubt or avoidance. Camille leaned toward Marcus. "He's unraveling." Marcus nodded. "Let's finish the job." Judge Harmon turned. "Mr. Bell, does the defense have additional evidence?" "Yes, Your Honor," Marcus said, retrieving another file. The defense would like to submit official internal complaints filed against Officer Reynolds, including sworn affidavits from 3 individuals alleging identical patterns of behavior, unlawful detainment, verbal hostility, and misuse of force. The gallery gasped. Avery stood again, desperate. Your Honor, we object to this as prejudicial. Overruled, Harmon said immediately. Jury will consider the documents. As the affidavits were passed out, the jury's expression shifted. Some leaned forward. One woman placed a hand over her mouth. The contents weren't just repetitive, they were damning. Marcus stood still as the storm of whispers built behind him. Then he turned to face the jury one last time. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, you now have 3 separate complaints. A falsified report, a non-functional camera, a use of force against a citizen who posed no threat, and a defendant who, despite being more than capable of defending herself with lethal force, chose not to. She used her training to remain calm. He used his badge to rewrite the story. He pointed gently toward Camille. She's not on trial because of what she did. She's on trial because of what she refused to do, submit to a lie. The room was silent. Judge Harmon closed the file in front of him with a quiet finality. We will reconvene for closing arguments tomorrow morning, he said, voice low. Court is adjourned. The gavel fell, and so did the last wall. Officer Garrett Reynolds sat motionless, eyes glazed, as people rose around him. The crowd spilled into the hallway, reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing, protesters cheering. Inside, Camille stood tall, a calm fortress amid the noise. Marcus leaned in, voice low. He's done. Camille didn't smile. She just nodded. The truth's louder now. But we're not finished. The final morning came cloaked in stillness. No wind. No birdsong. Just the steady murmur of the crowd gathering once again outside Brookhaven County Courthouse. But this time, there were more of them, veterans in uniform, law students with notebooks, mothers holding their children's hands. Camille Rivers had become more than a defendant. She was a question now posed to the justice system itself. And everyone wanted to see the answer. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere had shifted from tension to inevitability. The jury looked exhausted. The clerk typed with robotic focus. Officer Garrett Reynolds sat hunched in his seat like a man waiting to be pushed over a cliff. His lawyer, Richard Avery, didn't speak much. His notes were untouched. Camille entered in silence. No smiles. No pretense. Just a black dress shirt under a navy blazer, her face impassive. She didn't acknowledge the crowd. She didn't need to. Her presence was declaration enough. Judge Walter Harmon entered, his expression carved in granite. We will now hear closing statements, he said. Prosecution may begin. Avery stood, straightened his tie, and walked slowly to the center of the courtroom. His usual confident tone had dulled. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, he began, this case has drawn public attention, media spectacle, and emotional testimonies. But at its core, we must return to the facts. He gestured toward Reynolds. My client, Officer Garrett Reynolds, responded to a disturbance call. He encountered an individual who, in his view, was non-compliant. In high-pressure situations, officers must make difficult decisions often within seconds. Ms. Rivers is highly trained, yes, but that does not exempt her from cooperating with law enforcement. He paused, but the room was unmoved. Mistakes may have been made, but intent matters. And Officer Reynolds was doing his job. With that, Avery nodded to the judge and returned to his seat. No flourish. No fight left. Marcus Bell rose from the defense table and walked calmly to the front of the jury. He didn't carry notes. He didn't need them. 12 days ago, my client was just another name on a docket. Today, she's the reason people are watching this courtroom from 5 states away. And why? Because the truth has gravity. It pulls people toward it, even when they're afraid of what it will reveal. He took a single step toward the jury. Let's be clear. Camille Rivers did not resist. She did not reach for a weapon. She didn't shout, didn't curse, didn't swing. She asked a question. That's all. Why am I being stopped? And for that, she was shoved, cuffed, humiliated, and lied about. He let the silence build before continuing. The officer who did that, who tried to turn a question into a threat, sat in this courtroom and told you it was all justified. That the camera didn't capture it. That his fear mattered more than her rights. That the badge meant we shouldn't ask more of him. Another step. But we must ask more. Because when someone is given power, the standard doesn't lower, it rises. When you wear the uniform, you don't just represent the law. You embody its weight. He turned, pointing subtly at Camille. This woman has risked her life for this country. She's led rescue missions in combat zones. She stared down death more times than any of us could imagine. And yet, she came home to a country that let a lie be enough to put her in chains. One final step forward. Your decision today isn't just about her. It's about every officer who thinks intimidation is authority. Every bystander who stayed quiet. Every courtroom that buried the truth under red tape. You don't just get to decide if Camille Rivers walks free. You get to decide what this court believes in. He looked at each juror individually. Let today be the day silence stops winning. He returned to his seat. Camille said nothing. She didn't need to. Her testimony had already spoken volumes. Judge Harmon looked out over the courtroom. Jury will now be dismissed to deliberate. The jurors stood and filed into the deliberation room. The door shut with a soft click. The minutes stretched like hours. Camille sat still, her hands folded on the table. Marcus paced quietly, murmuring to himself. Reynolds stared down at the table in front of him, his fingers twitching. Avery drank water like it was an antidote. Then the door opened. The jury had returned. Everyone rose. The foreperson, a woman in her mid-50s with silver-rimmed glasses and a steady voice, stood with a folded slip of paper in hand. Judge Harmon looked down at her. Has the jury reached a verdict? Yes, Your Honor. Please read it aloud. She unfolded the paper. In the case of the state of Georgia versus Camille Rivers, we find the defendant not guilty on all charges. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Then silence. Then applause soft at first, then swelling as people stood. Judge Harmon banged his gavel. Order. But even he couldn't hide the flicker of respect in his eyes. The foreperson continued. Furthermore, we recommend that the conduct of Officer Garrett Reynolds be formally investigated for misconduct and perjury. The judge nodded, solemn. So noted. Officer Reynolds, you are advised to seek legal counsel immediately. This court will take up the matter of disciplinary proceedings under separate jurisdiction. Reynolds didn't react. He just stared blankly ahead, as if the sound had stopped reaching him. Camille exhaled slowly. For the first time since the trial began, her body loosened. She stood with Marcus beside her, facing the crowd. Cameras clicked. Reporters shouted questions. But she didn't answer. Not yet. Outside the courthouse, the sun finally broke through the morning fog. On the steps, surrounded by microphones, Camille paused, then spoke. This verdict is not just mine, she said. It belongs to every person who's ever been silenced, profiled, or punished for asking a simple question. It belongs to every woman who was told to be quiet. To every veteran who came home expecting justice and found something else. She looked out at the sea of faces. We live in a system that is only as strong as our willingness to hold it accountable. Today was one verdict. One voice. But we need more. Behind her, Marcus nodded with pride. And I'm not going anywhere, she finished. I fought overseas. I'll fight here too. The applause was thunderous. In the following weeks, Officer Reynolds was suspended, then dismissed from the force after internal investigators uncovered multiple discrepancies in prior arrest reports. He was indicted for perjury and tampering with evidence. Camille returned to a quieter life, but her story echoed in interviews, speeches, and classrooms. She never chased fame, but she accepted responsibility for the platform her pain had created. Because for her, justice wasn't just a verdict. It was a mission. Months had passed since the jury in Brookhaven County delivered its verdict, but the echoes of the courtroom battle still lingered across news cycles, classrooms, podcasts, and town hall meetings. Camille Rivers had not disappeared after her acquittal. She had evolved. Quietly, powerfully, deliberately. She no longer walked through town unnoticed. Children recognized her from headlines. Veterans saluted her with a different kind of respect, one that acknowledged her service overseas and her courage at home. She didn't wear medals. She didn't flaunt her rank. But she had become a symbol. Not because she sought it, but because she earned it. Officer Garrett Reynolds, once considered untouchable, had been formally charged with perjury, obstruction of justice, and tampering with official reports. The department that once defended him scrambled to distance itself. His name vanished from the precinct's roster. His photograph was removed from the wall of decorated officers. In its place, nothing. Just a hollow space where power had once stood, unchallenged. For Camille, life returned to a rhythm that was familiar but no longer ordinary. She spent her mornings reading on her porch, sipping coffee in silence. She answered emails from civil rights groups, veteran outreach organizations, and university professors requesting to feature her in seminars. She declined television interviews but said yes to 3 speaking engagements at public high schools. Not because she wanted attention, but because she wanted to make sure the next generation knew that justice isn't automatic. It's demanded. It's earned. One evening in early spring, Marcus Bell stopped by her house. He brought nothing but a worn notebook and a six-pack of cold soda. Camille opened the door before he knocked. "You always know," he said, stepping inside. "I always listen," she replied with a half-smile. They sat on the back porch as the sun dipped below the trees, casting the backyard in a soft orange hue. The air smelled of fresh-cut grass and magnolia. "Your name's showing up in law school lectures now," Marcus said, cracking open a can. Camille raised an eyebrow. "As a cautionary tale?" "As a case study in restraint, strategy, and civic courage," he said. "Students want to know how you stayed so composed." Camille took a sip of her drink, her eyes fixed on the fading sky. "The battlefield doesn't always have bullets. Sometimes it's words, and silence, and perception. You learn to control your breath before you pull a trigger. Same thing in court. Control the breath, then the words, then the room." Marcus nodded, scribbling something in his notebook. She glanced at him. "You're still writing about it?" He shrugged. "I think it matters. Not just the trial, but what came after. The ripples. The reforms. Your story didn't end at not guilty. It started there." Camille was quiet for a moment, then said, "I never thought fighting in my own country would feel heavier than fighting in uniform overseas." "Because the enemy looks familiar," Marcus said. "Because the battlefield isn't marked," she replied. "There are no borders, no briefings, just bias, buried so deep it walks and dressed like protocol." They sat in silence for a while, the night creeping in slow. Later that month, Camille gave a keynote speech at a veterans symposium in Atlanta. She wore her full dress uniform for the first time since retirement. The auditorium went silent as she walked across the stage. She stood behind the podium, no notes, no teleprompter. "My name is Lieutenant Commander Camille Rivers," she began, her voice steady, eyes locked on the crowd. "I served my country for 20 years. I've led missions across continents, faced enemies who spoke languages I didn't understand. But the hardest battle I ever fought was in a courtroom, in the country I swore to defend." She paused, letting the weight settle. "Because when I came home, I wasn't met with gratitude. I was met with suspicion. Not because of what I did, but because of how I look, and how I refused to be silent." She spoke not just about the trial, but about the lesson that silence empowers injustice, and that dignity must be louder than fear. When she finished, the crowd stood: veterans, students, senators, judges. No one clapped out of politeness. They clapped because something had shifted inside them. Over the next year, 3 states passed legislation requiring independent oversight when a police officer's body camera is reported inoperable during use of force. One of those laws was named informally by activists as Rivers Law, but Camille never mentioned it. She didn't post, didn't tweet. She just kept working quietly, volunteering at youth mentorship programs, speaking to cadets at the Naval Academy about ethics and leadership, helping build a scholarship fund for women of color pursuing law degrees. One evening, as she walked home from a community panel, a teenage girl stopped her on the sidewalk. "You're her, right? The one from the courthouse?" Camille smiled gently. "Yes." The girl looked down, nervously clutching a backpack. "I just wanted to say, when they called you angry on the news, I saw you, and you were just standing there. And I thought maybe I can be like that too." Camille paused, then bent down slightly to meet the girl's gaze. "You already are." The girl beamed, then hurried off down the street, her steps lighter. Camille stood there for a moment longer, then continued on. The streetlights above flickered on, one by one. Her steps steady, her breath even, her legacy unfolding with each quiet footfall. Because the fight for justice didn't end when the verdict came down. It just found a new name. And that name was Camille Rivers. This wasn't just a courtroom story. It was a story about restraint, resistance, and rewriting what power looks like. If Camille Rivers moved you share this story, leave a comment. Speak her name. Because in the quiet corners where justice is still waiting, your voice might be the one that makes the difference. Subscribe for more real stories that remind us what strength truly looks like.